When marine salvage divers cut open a Nazi U-boat in 2004, they found 47 perfectly preserved bodies, and one impossible detail: an American military vault welded inside the German submarine, with a warning scratched beside it, in desperate handwriting, "They already know." Inside the captain's quarters, a video recording waited, showing an 88-year-old man explaining how he'd spent 60 years protecting 12 children from 3 governments that wanted to turn them into weapons, children who'd been tortured in concentration camps until their minds could do impossible things, children who were still alive and hiding in plain sight. The salvage crane groaned as it lifted the rusted metal from the seabed, 200 feet below the surface off the coast of Argentina. Miguel Santos had been diving these waters for 30 years, pulling up forgotten wrecks for scrap metal and the occasional historical find, but nothing had prepared him for what emerged that morning in 2004. The submarine was impossibly intact. Most U-boats discovered after 60 years were crushed by pressure or torn apart by depth charges, but this one looked like it had been gently placed on the ocean floor and forgotten. The conning tower still bore faded markings, U-977, and bullet holes stitched across the hull told stories of a final battle that never quite finished the job. Miguel's team spent 3 days cutting through the sealed hatch. When it finally opened, the smell hit them first. Not decay exactly, but something chemical and wrong, like a hospital mixed with seawater and time. The interior was a tomb. 47 bodies lay in their bunks, fully dressed in Kriegsmarine uniforms, hands folded across their chests like they'd gone to sleep expecting to wake up. No signs of violence, no evidence of flooding or fire. They simply looked like they'd closed their eyes and never opened them again. The captain's quarters held the first real mystery. Kapitän Lieutenant Karl Donitz Jr., according to the logbook sitting open on the navigation table, the last entry was dated May 8, 1945, the day Germany surrendered. The handwriting was steady, controlled, nothing like the frantic scrawls usually found on doomed vessels. It read simply, "The mission is complete, we chose differently, God forgive us all." But it was what sat behind the captain's bunk that stopped Miguel cold. A steel vault, massive and out of place, welded directly into the submarine's frame. It wasn't standard German naval issue. The craftsmanship was too precise, too modern-looking. When his team scraped away 60 years of corrosion, they found something that made Miguel's blood run cold. Beneath the German gray paint were stenciled letters in English: "Property of United States Naval Intelligence, unauthorized access prohibited." The manufacturing date stamped on the lock mechanism read January 1944, a full year before the war ended, and 16 months before this U-boat supposedly sank. Miguel stood in that cramped captain's quarters, surrounded by perfectly preserved dead men, staring at an American vault inside a Nazi submarine, and realized he'd just opened something that powerful people had spent 60 years keeping closed. He reached for his radio to call the Argentine Navy, then stopped. Behind him, one of his divers was taking photographs of the vault, flash illuminating something Miguel had missed. Scratched into the metal beside the American markings, in what looked like desperate hurried work, were 3 words in German. Sie wissen bereits. They already know. Kapitän Lieutenant Karl Donitz Jr. stood at attention in the Reich Chancellery, trying not to think about how the marble floors were polished with Jewish labor. He was 28 years old, nephew to Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, and had 14 Allied ships to his name. The summons to Berlin had come without warning, without Rückkehr. Explanation: just a single typed order that pulled him from his crew in Kiel. He expected a medal ceremony, or perhaps a promotion. What he got instead was Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler sitting behind an enormous desk, flanked by 2 SS guards and a man Karl had never seen before. The stranger wore an American naval uniform with the insignia torn off, and his German was flawless but accented. "Kapitän Lieutenant," Himmler said without preamble, "you have been selected for Operation Götterdämmerung. Your uncle recommended you personally." The name meant Twilight of the Gods, the end of everything. Karl's stomach dropped. The American leaned forward. "My name was Thomas Sterling," he said, using past tense like his identity had already died. "I was OSS until 6 months ago. Now I work for people who understand that this war's outcome is already decided. What matters now is what comes after." Himmler slid a folder across the desk. Karl opened it to find photographs of a submarine, his submarine, U-97, but modified with equipment he didn't recognize. Cargo specifications listed weight capacities that made no sense for a combat vessel. The destination coordinates placed him in the South Atlantic, then overland to Paraguay. "You will transport cargo of vital importance," Himmler said. The details are classified, but understand this: the cargo represents Germany's future, perhaps humanity's future. Your mission is to ensure it arrives safely, regardless of the war's outcome. Carl understood immediately. This was an escape plan, a Nazi rat line disguised as a military operation. Whatever he was transporting, powerful men needed it hidden before the Allies arrived. And if I refuse? Carl asked, knowing the answer. Sterling smiled, cold and American. Your mother lives in Hamburg. Your sister teaches school in Munich. Your brother serves on the Eastern Front. Accidents happen in wartime, Kapitänleutnant. Carl looked at the photographs again, noticing something he'd missed. The cargo hold had been retrofitted with environmental controls, temperature regulation, power systems that belonged in a laboratory, not a submarine. Whatever he was transporting, it was alive. When do I leave? He asked. You depart Kiel in 4 weeks, Himmler said, standing to indicate the meeting was over. Your crew is being assembled as we speak. None of them are submariners, and you will understand why when you meet them. Complete this mission, Kapitänleutnant, and your family survives the Reich's collapse. Fail, and they won't survive the week. Carl saluted, turned on his heel, and walked out, knowing he'd just agreed to pilot a coffin, filled with secrets, into the dark waters of history. Carl stood on the frozen dock at Kiel Naval Base in February 1944, watching his new crew arrive, and realized immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. These weren't sailors. The first man off the truck moved like he'd never seen the ocean, stumbling on the gangway with the uncertain steps of someone whose world had been laboratories and lecture halls. He was maybe 45, thin to the point of starvation, with eyes that had seen things no doctor should see. Dr. Hans Becker, the man said, extending a trembling hand. Chief engineer, though I confess I know nothing about engines. I was a medical researcher at, he paused, his voice dropping to a whisper, at Auschwitz, until 3 weeks ago. The second crew member was even more impossible. Ernst Weber introduced himself as navigator, but Carl recognized the yellow star sewn onto his coat, hastily covered with a Kriegsmarine patch that didn't quite hide the edges. A Jewish mathematician in a Nazi submarine crew. Carl had entered an asylum disguised as a military operation. They kept coming, 43 men total, and not one looked like they belonged on a U-boat. Cryptographers who got seasick standing on the dock. Scientists who flinched at loud noises. A radio operator named Klaus Zimmermann who was only 19, fresh from Hitler youth training, eyes burning with fanatical belief that made him more dangerous than any Allied depth charge. Carl gathered them in the frozen assembly area, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. Gentlemen, he said, though the word felt absurd applied to this collection of the desperate and the damned, in 4 weeks we depart on a classified mission. Those who survive the voyage will understand why they were chosen. Those who don't, well, drowning is cleaner than what awaits failure. Dr. Becker approached him after dismissal, clutching a medical bag like a lifeline. Kapitänleutnant, you need to understand what we're transporting. It's not weapons or gold or stolen art. He glanced around to ensure they were alone. It's children, 12 of them, the ones who survived the programs. Carl felt the dock tilt beneath him though the ground was solid. Survived what programs? Enhancement research, Becker said, the words tasting like poison. Neurological modification, genetic acceleration, pharmaceutical augmentation. We were trying to create superior humans for the Reich. Most subjects died. These 12, they changed. They're alive. But they're not, he struggled for the word, not entirely human anymore. And now we're being sent to hide the evidence before the Allies discover what we've done. Carl looked at U-977 sitting in the harbor. This floating coffin that would carry Nazi Germany's darkest secrets into the depths, crewed by the guilty and the coerced, transporting children who'd been tortured into something new. He was being asked to save monsters by becoming one himself. The loading happened at midnight in early March 1944 under SS guard, with searchlights cutting through the fog like prison bars. Carl watched from the conning tower, as 12 steel crates were carried aboard U-977, each one stamped with red crosses, and the words medical supplies in 3 languages. The crates were too cold to touch, frost forming on the metal despite the workers' gloves, and they hummed with a sound like distant breathing. If stories like this move you, don't forget to leave a like, and share in the comments where you're watching from. No one spoke during the loading. The SS guards had their orders and their guns, and Carl's crew had learned quickly that questions led to consequences, but it was the vault that truly terrified him. They installed it in his captain's quarters, welding it directly into the submarine's frame with such precision that Carl knew this had been planned months in advance. The vault was massive, American-made judging by the manufacturing stamps, and painted over with German gray that couldn't quite hide the English lettering underneath. "You won't need the combination," the SS officer told him, handing over the sealed orders. "Your only job is delivery. The vault opens at the destination, not before." After the guards left, Carl waited until 0300 hours when only the night watch remained awake. He descended into the cargo hold, where the 12 crates sat in their specially refrigerated compartments, connected to power systems that drained the submarine's batteries even while docked. Dr. Becker was there, checking gauges with the obsessive attention of a man trying to prevent his conscience from catching up to his actions. One crate sat partially open, its seal broken during loading. Carl approached it slowly, his breath visible in the refrigerated air. Inside, wrapped in tubes and wires, and surrounded by equipment that belonged in a hospital, was a small cryogenic chamber. Through the frosted glass, he could see a face. A child, maybe 10 years old, pale as death, but not dead. Preserved, sleeping, waiting. The nameplate riveted to the chamber read Rachel Goldstein, age 12, subject designation A7, Neural Enhancement Protocol. Below that, in smaller letters, a warning in German and English both. Do not wake before arrival. Cognitive overflow may cause permanent damage or death. There are 11 more, Dr. Becker said quietly behind him. All Jewish children, all taken from camps, all subjected to programs that would make Mengele look merciful. They survived what killed hundreds of others. Their minds were, he paused, searching for a word that wouldn't damn him further, accelerated, enhanced. Some can process information like machines. Others can hear radio frequencies without equipment. One boy can calculate trajectories in his head faster than our best computers. Carl stared at Rachel's frozen face. She looks normal. That's what makes it worse, Becker whispered. They're still children inside. They remember everything we did to them, every injection, every test, every scream. And now we're smuggling them away, so the research can continue somewhere else, under some other flag, with some other children. Carl closed the crate carefully, his hands shaking in the cold air that had nothing to do with temperature. U-977 slipped beneath the cold waters of the North Sea on April 2, 1944, carrying 47 souls and 12 frozen children into the darkness. Carl stood at the periscope watching Kiel disappear behind them, knowing most of his crew would never see home again. The sealed orders sat in his quarters, instructions he wasn't permitted to read until they reached open ocean. 3 days out, he finally broke the wax seal. The coordinates placed them in the South Atlantic, off the coast of Argentina, where they would rendezvous with a land team for overland transport to Paraguay. Estimated journey time was 6 weeks if they avoided Allied patrols. The final line of the orders made his blood cold. Upon arrival, Kapitänleutnant Donitz will surrender command to Operation Paperclip representatives and return to Germany for debriefing and permanent reassignment. Permanent reassignment. The Reichspolite term for a bullet in a basement. Klaus intercepted a radio transmission on April 23, his young face pale as he handed Carl the decoded message. Allied invasion imminent, all Atlantic assets to defensive positions, no exceptions. But their orders said nothing about returning. They were to continue south, away from the war, away from Germany's desperate final stand. That night, Dr. Becker came to Carl's quarters, glancing nervously at the sealed vault that dominated the small space. "I need to tell you what we're really carrying," he said, sitting down without permission. "Those children, they're not just experiments, they're proof. Proof that the enhancement programs work, that human beings can be modified and improved. Every major power has been trying to create superior soldiers for decades. We succeeded." Carl poured them both schnapps from his private supply. "At what cost?" Becker's hands shook as he drank. "Rachel Goldstein, the girl you saw, she can memorize anything instantly. Every word, every image, every sound. Perfect recall. Jakob Stein can hear radio frequencies, distinguish between transmission types without equipment. Sarah Hoffman processes mathematical calculations faster than any machine we've built. They're miracles, Kapitänleutnant. Miracles born from nightmares. And the Americans want them," Carl said, understanding finally clicking into place. "Not just Americans, everyone." Becker leaned forward. "That vault in your quarters contains complete documentation of every experiment, every procedure, every formula. Names of all researchers, locations of all facilities, results of every trial. Whoever controls that data controls the future of human enhancement. The children are living proof the science works. Carl looked at the vault, this Pandora's box welded into his submarine. So we're not escaping the Reich's collapse. We're ensuring the programs survive it. Becker nodded slowly. The war will end, Kapitänleutnant. Germany will fall. But the research, the knowledge, the possibilities, someone will continue the work. The only question is whether those children live as proof or die as evidence. Right now, keeping them alive is the only mercy I have left to offer. Outside, the ocean pressed against the hull, dark and deep and indifferent to the moral weight of what they carried toward an uncertain shore. Commander Jack Morrison of the USS Barracuda detected the unusual sonar signature on May 7, 1944, 300 miles off the coast of Portugal. A German U-boat running deep and slow, following a course that made no tactical sense. It was heading away from Allied shipping lanes, away from the war, south toward nothing but empty ocean. Con, sonar, we have a submerged contact bearing 270, his sonar operator called out. Signature matches German Type 7 U-boat, designated U-977 per Naval Intelligence Database. She's running quiet but not hiding. Morrison studied the plotting table, tracking the submarine's projected course. His executive officer, Lieutenant Chen, stood beside him with the attack solutions already calculated. We can hit her from here, sir. Easy shot, textbook approach. She doesn't even know we're tracking her. But Morrison's orders sat in his safe, classified instructions that had come directly from Washington 3 days before U-977 even departed Germany. Orders that made no sense for a wartime patrol. Shadow and report position every 6 hours. Do not engage without explicit authorization. Maintain surveillance until further notice. Sir, Chen pressed, standing orders are to sink on sight. Every U-boat we let pass kills American merchant marines. What are we waiting for? Morrison had been asking himself the same question for 3 days. He'd commanded Barracuda for 18 months, sunk 7 enemy vessels, lost 12 men to depth charges off Gibraltar. He knew the rules, knew the mission, knew that letting a German submarine escape was borderline treason. But he also knew his brother Eddie had died at Field Hospital 7 in France, executed by SS soldiers while wounded in his bed, and that someone called the Ghost had hunted those killers across Europe with a rifle and perfect aim. The Navy didn't give strange orders without reason. Someone very high up wanted U-977 to reach its destination alive. Continue tracking, Morrison ordered finally. Battle stations torpedo but hold fire. I want to know where she's going and why we're letting her get there. For 2 weeks Barracuda shadowed U-977 south through the Atlantic. Morrison reported position every 6 hours like clockwork and received the same response each time. Maintain surveillance, do not engage. On May 21st, he received a longer transmission, this one from someone identifying themselves as Operation Paperclip Coordination. The message was brief and damning. U-977 carries assets of vital scientific importance. Your mission is to ensure safe passage to designated coordinates. Any interference will be considered obstruction of national security objectives. Do not acknowledge this transmission. Morrison read it 3 times before burning it per protocol. His government, the country his brother died defending, was protecting a Nazi submarine. Not just protecting it, escorting it, ensuring whatever cargo it carried reached safety. He called Chen to his quarters and showed him the message before the ashes finished cooling. His XO read it in silence, face unreadable. Sir, what are we going to do? Morrison looked at the plotting table where U-977's course stretched toward Argentina like a line drawn across his conscience. I don't know yet, but we're going to find out what's worth betraying everything we're supposed to believe in. The alarm screamed through U-977 at 0200 hours on June 14, 1944, dragging Carl from fitful sleep into crisis. He reached the cargo hold in 30 seconds to find Dr. Becker frantically adjusting controls on one of the cryogenic chambers, sweat pouring down his face despite the refrigerated air. Chamber 7 is failing, Becker shouted over the warning klaxons. Power surge damaged the temperature regulation. We have maybe 10 minutes before the subject dies, or we wake her up. Carl stared at the frosted glass where Rachel Goldstein's pale face floated in chemical suspension. Can we repair it? Not without parts we don't have and time we don't have. Becker's hands moved across the controls with desperate precision. If we wake her now, she'll be disoriented, possibly violent. The neural enhancements make them unpredictable during emergence. But if we don't, the temperature spike will cook her brain while she's still conscious enough to feel it. Wake her, Carl ordered, and helped Becker drain the cryofluid from the chamber. Rachel came back to life screaming. Not the scream of someone waking from nightmare, but the calculated scream of someone who knew exactly where she was and what had been done to her. Her eyes snapped open, focused immediately on Carl's face, and he saw intelligence there that was simultaneously 12 years old and ancient. The cryofluid drained away, and she gasped air into lungs that hadn't breathed in months. Becker caught her as she stumbled from the chamber, wrapping her in thermal blankets, while her body shook with the violence of forced awakening. She was small, malnourished, covered in scars from medical procedures Carl didn't want to understand. "Where?" she gasped in German, then switched to fluent English without pause. "Where are we? What date? How long was I under?" "June 14th, Carl said gently. 1944. You've been in cryo-suspension for 4 months. Rachel's eyes darted around the cargo hold, processing everything with unnatural speed. Submarine, German, modified cargo capacity, 12 chambers total, 1 malfunctioning. She looked directly at him. "You're Kapitän Leutnant Donitz, nephew to the Grand Admiral. 14 Allied ships confirmed kills. Unmarried, no children. You were given this command against your will." Carl stepped back, startled. "How do you know that?" "Because I can hear you," she said, tapping her head. "Not your thoughts, but your radio traffic, your communications. Everything transmitted on electromagnetic frequencies for the past 6 hours since I started waking up. You've been reporting position to someone every 6 hours. Someone is following us, American submarine, staying exactly 3,000 meters behind. You know they're there, but you haven't reported it to your crew." She stood on shaking legs, blankets falling away. And Carl saw a child who'd been tortured into something that could hear the invisible world. "That's not possible," Becker whispered. Rachel smiled, sad and knowing. "You made us into impossibilities, Dr. Becker. Now you're transporting us like cargo to people who'll use us as weapons." She looked at Carl. "The question is whether you'll let them." Commander Morrison sat in his quarters aboard USS Barracuda on July 9, 1944, decoding a transmission that would force him to choose between his oath and his conscience. The message came through on a frequency he wasn't supposed to monitor. A back channel between OSS headquarters and something called Operation Paperclip Coordination. His radio man had stumbled across it by accident and brought it to Morrison without logging it officially. The decoded text made his hands shake. U-97. 7 cargo confirmed as 12 juvenile subjects from program Sonnenkind. Neural enhancement trials conducted at Auschwitz and Dachau under Himmler direct authorization. Subjects demonstrate enhanced cognitive processing and sensory perception. American acquisition approved per Joint Chiefs Directive March 1944. Scientific value supersedes War Crimes Tribunal considerations. Morrison read it 3 times, each reading making him sicker. His government had known about Nazi experiments on children since March, had approved acquiring the victims and the research, had ordered him to protect the submarine carrying them. This wasn't an intelligence operation. It was smuggling evidence. He pulled his brother Eddie's last letter from his desk drawer, worn soft from reading. Eddie had written it 3 days before Field Hospital 7, talking about a nurse named Ruth who patched up soldiers with steady hands and bad jokes. Eddie died in his bed, executed by SS soldiers, while that nurse hid in a closet. Later she became something else, something the Germans called the Ghost, and she hunted Eddie's killers with the same methodical precision Morrison now understood too well. His XO Chen knocked and entered without waiting. "Sir, we just intercepted another transmission. This one's different." He handed Morrison the decoded sheet. "Source is U-977, but it's not their standard comm protocol. Someone's broadcasting on an emergency frequency. No encryption, plain German." Morrison read the message. It was short, desperate, and changed everything. "To any Allied vessel receiving this transmission, I am Ernst Weber, navigator aboard U-977. We are transporting 12 children subjected to medical experiments by the Reich, children who were modified against their will. Our destination is Argentina, where they will be transferred to American custody for continued research. I am broadcasting our exact position. Please intercept. Please save them. They are children, not weapons." The transmission included coordinates, course, speed, everything needed for an attack. Morrison checked his plot. Weber's numbers were accurate. U-977 was exactly where he said it was, where Morrison had been tracking it for 8 weeks. Chen watched him carefully. "Sir, if that transmission is real, if there are children on that U-boat being taken to," he couldn't finish the sentence. Morrison thought about Eddie dying in his hospital bed, thought about Ruth Hawthorne becoming a killer to stop killers, Thought about the oath he took to defend America, and whether America deserved defending when it made deals with monsters. He picked up the ship's phone. All hands, battle stations. Prepare to surface and engage enemy submarine. His voice was steady despite everything breaking inside him. We're stopping that U-boat, orders or no orders, and we're getting those children out. Klaus Zimmermann found Ernst Weber's hidden radio transmitter on August 3, 1944, and the fragile piece aboard U-977 shattered like glass under pressure. Carl was in the control room when Klaus burst in, 19 years old and burning with Hitler Youth conviction, waving a wire-tapped frequency modulator like evidence at a trial. Kapitänleutnant, Klaus shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, Navigator Weber has been broadcasting our position to the enemy for 6 weeks. He's a traitor and a Jew, and he's been sabotaging the mission from the start. The control room went silent. Ernst stood at the navigation table, his false Aryan papers suddenly meaningless, and Carl saw the desperate calculation in his eyes. Ernst had known this moment was coming, had been broadcasting anyway, hoping someone would hear, someone would care about 12 children more than orders. Carl made his choice in a heartbeat. Zimmermann, stand down. Weber was following my orders. We've been coordinating with Allied forces for safe passage. It was a lie so transparent that even Klaus's fanatical loyalty couldn't accept it. You're lying to protect him, Klaus said, pulling his sidearm. You've both betrayed the Führer, betrayed the mission, betrayed everything. He turned to the other crew members. Who's with me? Who still believes in Germany's future? 12 men moved to Klaus's side. True believers mostly. The ones who'd volunteered for this mission thinking it was heroic, not understanding they were smuggling evidence of atrocities. The rest of Carl's crew, 31 men broken by what they'd seen and what they carried, stayed silent. The submarine was too small for a gunfight. Klaus fired first, wild with adrenaline, and his shot punched through a hydraulic line instead of Ernst. Pressure fluid sprayed across the control room like arterial blood. Ernst tackled Klaus, while Carl tried to reach the weapon, but Dr. Becker appeared from the cargo hold and stepped between them. Stop! Becker shouted, both hands raised. This mission is already finished. Whether we complete it or not, we're all dead men. The Americans are following us, the Russians probably know too, and anyone who delivers that cargo will be silenced to protect the secret. Klaus shoved Becker aside. The mission matters more than our lives. For Germany, for the future, for everything we've sacrificed. Becker pulled a syringe from his medical bag, something he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting. Not for Germany, he said quietly. For 12 children you've never even seen. He grabbed Klaus's arm and injected before anyone could stop him. Klaus dropped in seconds, convulsing, eyes wide with betrayal. The mutiny ended, but the damage was done. The hydraulic line failure meant they couldn't dive safely, couldn't submerge below 50 meters without risking catastrophic pressure breach. U-977 was vulnerable now, trapped on the surface where any patrol plane could spot them. Carl looked at his fractured crew, at Ernst's secret radio, at the cargo hold, full of frozen children. They were 500 miles from Argentina, with a crippled submarine and enemies on every side. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, and Carl received the news through his uncle's final transmission while U-977 drifted 300 miles off the Argentine coast. The war in Europe is over, Admiral Donitz's voice crackled through static. All is lost but the future. Complete the mission, Carl, save what can be saved, let something survive this madness. Carl stood in the control room surrounded by exhausted men who'd been at sea for 13 months, longer than any U-boat patrol in history. They'd evaded destroyers, survived depth charges, rationed food until they were eating leather and rust. Rachel Goldstein sat in the corner monitoring radio frequencies with her unnaturally enhanced hearing, translating the electromagnetic chaos of a world reshaping itself after 6 years of war. The American submarine just surfaced, she said without opening her eyes. Commander Morrison is signaling with his lamp, he wants to talk. Carl climbed to the conning tower and read the blinking light cutting through morning fog. Morrison's message was brief. War is over. I have orders to escort you to transfer point, but I also have a conscience. We need to talk face to face. No weapons, my word as an officer. They met on the surface with 20 feet of ocean between their vessels, speaking through electric megaphones while their crews watched with fingers on triggers. Morrison looked as hollowed out as Carl felt, a man who'd followed orders until orders became unbearable. I know what you're carrying, Morrison called across the water. 12 children, experimental subjects, victims. My orders are to escort you to Argentina, where OSS will take custody. Your orders are to complete delivery. We're both pawns in something that shouldn't exist. Carl thought about Rachel describing her memories of the experiments, the clinical precision, the torture, the way they'd turn children into impossibilities. What would you have me do, Commander? Scuttle my boat? Drown the children I've kept alive for a year? Let them die rather than let America continue what Germany started? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. There's a third option. We fake your destruction. Hide the children where neither government can find them. Let them grow up as normal people instead of weapons. It means we both become deserters, both throw away everything we were, but those kids get a chance at life. Rachel's voice crackled over Carl's radio, urgent and afraid. There's a third submarine, Soviet, coming fast from the southeast. They've been listening to everything, they want the children too. Carl looked at Morrison across 20 feet of ocean that suddenly felt like an impossible distance to bridge. Two enemy commanders. Both offered the same devil's bargain, both realizing the war never ended, just changed flags. Do you trust me? Morrison asked. No, Carl answered honestly, but I trust what we both left behind, more than what's coming for us. Carl and Morrison had exactly 4 hours before the Soviet submarine arrived. 4 hours to save 12 children from becoming permanent weapons in a war that would never officially exist. They worked together in Carl's captain's quarters, two enemy commanders united by what they'd both lost to orders and duty, staring at the American vault welded into U-977's frame. We need to open it, Morrison said. Whatever's inside is why 3 governments want these children dead or controlled. Carl had the demolition charges ready, small and precise, enough to crack the lock without destroying contents. The explosion echoed through the submarine like a gunshot in a cathedral. The vault door swung open, and they found themselves looking at the complete record of human monstrosity, organized in neat files. 12 binders, one for each child, detailing every experiment, every modification, every moment of agony that created their enhancements. Photographs of procedures that made Morrison turn away, chemical formulas written in handwriting that belonged to doctors who'd sworn oaths to heal, and names. Hundreds of names, researchers and administrators and officials who'd known, approved, participated, but it was the second section that stopped them both cold. A list of Phase 2 facilities, dated January 1945, showing locations across 3 continents. America had 17 sites listed, Soviet Union had 12, Britain had 5. Even neutral Switzerland had 2. The experiments hadn't ended with Germany's surrender, they'd metastasized. Rachel appeared in the doorway, small and pale, speaking with the certainty of someone who could hear truth in radio waves. The Soviet submarine will be here in 3 hours. They have orders to sink both of you and recover the cargo. Your governments have already agreed to let it look like an accident, blame it on leftover mines, split the research data afterward. Morrison grabbed the Phase 2 list. If we expose this, publish everything, maybe public outrage stops the programs. Carl shook his head. Or it drives them deeper underground. Makes them more careful about witnesses. He looked at Rachel. What do you want? You and the other children, what do you want to happen? Rachel had been 12 years old when they'd stolen her from her family, modified her brain until she could hear the invisible spectrum, kept her frozen while the world burned itself down. She was still 12, but she'd lived through things that aged souls beyond bodies. I want to disappear, she said simply. All of us. We want to be normal people with normal lives. Let the world think we died when this submarine sank. Let the governments search for bodies they'll never find. Morrison and Carl looked at each other, and Carl saw the same realization dawning. They had one chance to end this, not through violence or exposure, but through the Bay Bar. Oldest magic of all, making something valuable become invisible. The plan they formed in the next hour would require both submarines, all the explosives they could spare, and the willingness to let the world believe they'd all died at sea. It would mean giving up everything they'd been for something they might become. The explosion that killed U-977 happened at 1400 hours on May 8, 1945, exactly 1 year after Germany's surrender. At least that's what 3 governments reported when wreckage surfaced off the Argentine coast, oil slicks and debris, and enough bodies to make the story believable. The Soviet submarine arrived 20 minutes too late, found only burning fuel and corpses, and reported mission failure to Moscow. What they didn't find was the submarine itself, scuttled carefully in shallow water 2 miles from where the explosion occurred, or the 47 crew members sealed inside in chemical suspension, or the 12 children already awakened and scattered across South America with new names and forged papers. Carl and Morrison staged it perfectly. They'd pulled bodies from a mass grave near Buenos Aires, men who'd died months before, dressed them in German and American uniforms, and floated them in the debris field. Close enough for distant observation, 2 destroyed for identification. Both commanders officially died that day, their names added to casualty lists, their families sent regrets and folded flags. But Carl spent the next 60 years in Argentina, under the name Carlos Mendez, a quiet schoolteacher who checked on 12 former children as they grew into adults. Rachel became a librarian in Chile. Jakob opened a radio repair shop in Uruguay. Sarah taught mathematics at a university in Brazil. They lived unremarkable lives, their enhancements hidden, their histories buried, their existence a secret 3 governments had tried to own. Morrison returned to America briefly, tried to expose what he'd learned, but his evidence mysteriously disappeared, and he was quietly discharged for mental instability. He spent his remaining years in Oregon, writing letters no one believed to newspapers that wouldn't publish them. In 2003, Carl felt the cancer taking him and made his final decision. He returned to U-977, still resting in 40 meters of water, still sealed, still holding his crew in suspension as witnesses to what had happened. He activated the submarine's emergency beacon, the one that would eventually bring salvage teams, then climbed into his captain's quarters and recorded everything on video. "My name is Captain Lieutenant Carl Donitz Jr., he said to the camera, sitting beside the opened vault. "I died officially on May 8, 1945, but I've been alive for 60 years protecting 12 children from becoming weapons. This vault contains proof of crimes committed by all sides. Programs that didn't end with the war but continued in secret. The children survived. They're grandparents now, living normal lives. But someone needs to know the truth." He placed the video beside his logbook, took the poison Dr. Becker had given him decades before for this exact purpose, and lay down in his bunk to wait for death. Miguel Santos found him 9 months later, perfectly preserved, surrounded by evidence that would force the world to finally acknowledge what had been done in the name of progress, and what 12 impossible children had survived.